Hi guys, and welcome back to History of Vision Success. So today we're going to be looking at what was the impact of World War II on America. Because America was on the winning side in the First World War. However, from that point, it had actually kept out of the affairs of other countries for many years. And this policy was known as isolationism. But when the Second World War broke out in 1939, the USA quickly began selling weapons to Britain and France. And in 1941, America went to war on the side of the Allies. So how and why did this happen? Well, if we look at, firstly, the policy of isolation in a little bit more detail, well, America hadn't joined the League of Nations, an international peacekeeping organization, at the end of the First World War. Instead, it concentrated on building up its economy and strong trade links. And isolationism actually carried on well into the 1930s. The Neutrality Act of 1935 banned loans to countries at war, for example, and also a 1937 law stopped the sale of weapons to any countries involved in the conflict. Now, Congress was dominated by isolationists who believed that American entry into World War I had been a mistake, and who were determined to prevent the US from being drawn into yet another European war. Now, Roosevelt accepted the neutrality laws, but at the same time warned Americans of the danger of remaining isolated from a world increasingly menaced by the dictatorial regimes in Germany, Italy, and Japan. Speaking in Chicago in October 1937, FDR actually made his famous quarantine speech in which he proposed that peace-loving nations should stand up to aggressive nations. And he actually said that the countries should break off relations with nations that are taking over or threatening other nations and treat them as if they were in quarantine, like a person with an infectious disease. And it was clear that he was referring here to Germany, Italy, and Japan, which had been taking over nations in Europe, Africa, and the Far East as well. Now, as soon as war broke out in Europe in September 1939, America declared support for Britain and France against Hitler's Germany and its allies. FDR feared that if Germany defeated Britain and France, then America may soon come under attack. He was also concerned about Japan's aggressiveness in the Far East, where America did much trade and controlled large areas of land. So Roosevelt persuaded Congress to change the neutrality laws and allow the USA to help Britain and France against Germany. However, they did not send soldiers to fight against the Nazis yet. Instead, the USA sold high-quality American-made weapons to Britain and France. In November 1939, Britain and France began buying US weapons, warships, and planes known as the Cash and Carry Plan. And this created valuable production jobs in America at a time when unemployment was rising. However, in June 1940, Germany defeated France and took over and occupied Paris. And Britain stood alone as Hitler's armies began invading most of the other major European countries. And when the British government ran short of money, Roosevelt actually managed to convince Congress to intensify defense preparations and to support Britain with all aid short of war. And in the fall of that year, Roosevelt actually sent 50 older destroyers to Britain, which feared an imminent German invasion in exchange for 8 naval bases. Now, the swaps of ships for bases took place during the 1940 presidential election campaign. And earlier in the year, the Democrats had nominated Roosevelt for a 3rd term, even though his election would break the 2-term tradition honored since the presidency of George Washington. The Republican nominee, Wendell Willkie, represented a departure from the isolationist-dominated Republican Party, and the two candidates actually agreed on most foreign policy issues, including increased military aid to Britain. On election day, Roosevelt defeated Willkie soundly by 27 million to 22 million popular votes. And though his margin of victory was less than it had been in 1932 and 1936, it was a victory nonetheless. Roosevelt's support was probably reduced by a number of factors, including the break of the two-term tradition and also fears that he would lead the nation into war. And this he did slowly start to come true to those fears, because by inauguration day in 1941, Britain was running out of cash and finding it really difficult to, especially owing to German submarine attacks, to carry American arms across the Atlantic. So in March 1941, after bitter debate in Congress, Roosevelt obtained passage of the Lend-Lease Act, which enabled the United States to accept non-cash payment for military and other aid to Britain and its allies. So instead of selling, America would actually lend Britain up to $7,000 million worth of weapons. And most people did know that America was very unlikely to get or to want these weapons back. Now, the US struck a similar deal with Russia when Germany attacked it in June 1941. And later that year, Roosevelt also authorized the US Navy to provide protection for Lend-Lease shipments. And in autumn, he instructed the Navy to shoot on sight at German submarines. And all these actions moved the United States that ever bit closer to actual belligerency, physical kind of aggression with Germany. Despite its official position of neutrality, it was clear that the American government supported Britain's war against Germany. Now, some US organizations, however, such as the Mothers Crusade and the America First Committee, actually held large anti-war demonstrations because they feared America might get dragged into another European conflict, and they were scarred by the First World War and the results of that. But others soon began to see actually the benefits of an end to isolationism. Because as America began to rearm, in case it was forced to enter the war, millions found jobs building fighter planes, battleships, and tanks. Unemployed men became trainee soldiers, sailors, and pilots. And when Roosevelt was voted in as president for a third time in 1940, unemployment was starting to drop. In 1941, there were just 5.5 million unemployed compared to over 10 million just 4 years before. To some, it seemed as if the Second World War, and not Roosevelt's New Deal, was now beginning to get Americans back to work. Now, the roots of America's official entry into the Second World War actually lie in its relationship with Japan, because during the 1930s, Japan began to invade many of the surrounding countries, including China. Japan, which was a relatively small country with a large population, wanted the food and raw materials that these nations were producing. And so to this end, Japan declared war on China in 1937, which resulted in the Nanking Massacre and other atrocities as well. And the Nanking Massacre, this was when over a period of 6 weeks, Imperial Japanese armed forces brutally murdered hundreds of thousands of people, including both soldiers and civilians, in the Chinese city of Nanking. The horrific events are known as the Nanking Massacre, or the Rape of Nanking, as between 20,000 and 80,000 women were sexually assaulted. Nanking, the then capital of nationalist China, was left in absolute ruins, and it would take decades for the city and for its citizens to recover from the savage attacks. Now, in protest at Japan's aggression, Roosevelt vowed not to sell any oil or steel to Japan. And this angered the Japanese, as their industries used millions of tons of US steel and oil every single year. So as the relationship between the two countries grew worse, Japanese military leaders planned a secret attack on US ships at a naval base in the Hawaiian Islands called Pearl Harbor. And you can see behind me there where Japan is, and then the Hawaiian Islands, they aren't actually too far away. And it was from here that American battleships would attack Japan if war broke out. Now, the Japanese thought that it would take the Americans a year to replace the destroyed ships. During this time, Japan would have created a Southeast Asian empire that the US wouldn't have been able to take back. Now, no one believed that the Japanese would actually start a war with an attack on the distant islands of Hawaii. Additionally, American intelligence officials were confident that any Japanese attack would take place in one of the relatively nearby European colonies in the South Pacific, including the Dutch East Indies, Singapore, or Indochina. Now, because American military leaders were not expecting an attack so close to home, the naval facilities at Pearl Harbor were actually relatively undefended. And almost the entire Pacific fleet was moored around Ford Island in the harbor, and hundreds of airplanes were actually squeezed onto adjacent airfields. So at 7:55 a.m. on Sunday, the 7th of December, 1941, 183 Japanese bomber planes attacked Pearl Harbor. And as you can see behind me, the Japanese sent different types of planes, including dive bombers, which start high and get very low to the ground, so their targets are more precise, and also torpedo bombers, which set off and release torpedoes into the ocean to then attack the ships. Now, the Americans were caught completely by surprise, and you can see some of the damage done behind me. In just 2 hours, 21 US warships were sunk or damaged, 177 US planes were destroyed, and over 2,400 Americans were killed. And the Japanese lost just 29 planes. Now, Doris Miller was a US naval serviceman who was noted for his bravery during the attack. And Miller had joined the Navy, as a mess attendant, because that was the only available position for African Americans during this time. And he rose steadily through the ranks to the ship's cook. So that when the attack began, Miller was actually doing laundry below decks on the USS West Virginia ship. And when the alarm called the ship's crew to battle stations, Miller headed a gun magazine amid the ships. A torpedo had damaged the magazine, however, so being physically strong, he began carrying the wounded to safety. Miller then manned a .50 caliber anti-aircraft gun for which he had absolutely no training, and continued firing on the enemy until he ran out of ammunition and received the order to abandon ship. He then became the first African-American recipient of the Navy Cross for Valor. Now, it should be noted that despite the terrible losses, the attack on Pearl Harbor could have actually been much worse for the Americans, because part of their Navy, including the aircraft carriers, were actually out at sea when the attack took place and escaped undamaged. And so it wouldn't actually take as long as the Japanese hoped for the US Navy to get back to full strength. Nevertheless, behind me, you can see the image of the wreck of the USS Arizona, once one of the largest battleships in the world. And you can see behind me the destruction of it at Pearl Harbor after the Japanese attack. Now, I think it was more the shock of the attack before a declaration of war that really rallied the nation to get behind the war. And the next day, America and Britain declared war on Japan. So very, very quickly, the declaration was passed through Congress. And 3 days later, Germany and Italy, Japan's official allies, then declared war on America. So now the world's richest, most powerful countries are now involved in what was to become the world's most destructive and expensive war.